Hiya, Nate.
I'm going to switch to the room that they'll be able to hear us. So and we'll get started then.
Oh, sorry, Nate. You need. Okay, here. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
Say that again.
Yeah, so just let me know when you're ready, and I will switch to the room where in OBS Studio where this will show up.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm good whenever.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in or listening after the fact as we discuss Brady's nursery, Remnant Roots native plants. Is that right?
That's right.
And the awesome things that he's been doing. Brady, I've known him for a number of years, and most of you who are listening probably also know his handiwork in the Native Plant Society Facebook group. He's the person who was bold enough to start that back at what year was that?
That was probably late 2018 into 2019.
Yeah,
That seems like a long time ago now.
I know, I know. The group
So
has
before I
stayed
took
together
a
even as
rather
many other groups have fallen apart and disappeared. Um,
before I took a rather long hiatus from social media, unfortunately. But I get back into it. I get back into it.
yeah, so we love seeing your posts and your comments. You're very informative. And you wear many hats, but today we're going to be discussing your entrepreneurial hat. Um, and so, yeah, I think this is just going to be a conversation. It's just going to flow. But I just love to hear kind of your story, what got you into the native plant nursery business, and what inspires you to start Remnant Roots.
Yeah, no. So I've pretty much always been interested in nature. Uh, as a kid, loved Steve Irwin. Herps and insects and all sorts of things. And at some point, made a real big switch to plants. That probably happened in some part. We had a lot of family land that I could explore, and always took note of plants. But at some point, we did a timber thinning, and there were a lot of plants on this area that had been pine for very thick, unthinned, unburned pine for you know over 20 years. And there were things that came up out of the seed bank, which was a new term to me, that were not anywhere else in the property. Things like bee balm, things like silphiums, and so I started to learn about some of these native grassland plants. And fortunately, had an older cousin who was herself formerly in the landscaping and the nursery business, primarily working with native materials, and she was working in Louisiana with a lot of people in the native plant circle. Um, and so she kind of helped to guide me, and she took me to some Louisiana Native Plant Society meetings and to some Mississippi Native Plant Society events. And yeah, I just sort of ended up where I did. I worked at Mississippi State in the entomology department, did some propagation of native black belt prairie plants from local remnants there. Um, and those went back out to some restorations along the Natchez Trace, and to a display garden that's still at the entomology department there now. Um, and so yeah, no, I kind of just loved propagation, and came to love plants. I loved the where plants linked so many other taxa, the insects and the birds and whatnot. And I said, oh, well, I mean, if you grow these things, you can bring them to your yard. You can create habitat and create resources for them. And many of the plants themselves are imperiled and need our help as well. And so they're beautiful, they're functional. Um, some of them are maybe a bit esoteric that I enjoy, but they have their niche that they've carved out in nature. And so there's a tremendous diversity of them. And yeah, no, I just love to grow them, and I love to share plants. And it seems like a great way to kind of conserve them as well, to use a nursery to help share many of these plants and get them in people's yards, and maybe even larger business landscapes and restorations and such.
But there's a lot of science coming out that shows that building habitats in our yards can be helpful. It's maybe not the same thing as restoring or preserving a vast
Yeah,
natural area,
yeah,
but I had I mean, I know it's probably not the rarest thing, but that Passiflora bee the one that visits yellow passion flower. I had that pop up in my yard pretty much the same year that I planted yellow passion flower.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a
And
poorly
so,
documented,
no,
poorly understood, if I understand correctly.
say again.
It was poorly documented, poorly understood, maybe rare. We don't
Yeah,
really know. Is that fair?
yeah, I agree with that. It's one of those things that's probably flown under the radar for quite a while and has just been poorly documented. Many people don't even know about that species of passion flower, the little green, little yellow passion flower. So, you have a plant that's really common, it's everywhere, but it sort of itself goes unnoticed. And then, many people don't know about our specialist bees. So therefore it goes unnoticed. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're talking about esoteric native plants, what are some examples of those?
A good example, there's a fun little annual weed that's native, and I mean, it's unique. It stands out, among some other things. It's called Obi-Wan Kenobia, and it's a little native, maybe weed that grows in cracks and crevices and asphalt. You often see it in more urban areas. Like see it if I go to New Orleans. It's in all the cracks. I see it in Jackson. And, one of those things, it's native, but we probably can't be sure of what its range is. It's not showy. It's a really diminutive little plant, but it has a fun name. The people who described it named it for Obi-Wan Kenobi. I don't really know why, but they did, and so that's fun. That's so I would call that esoteric. It's not something that you would plant in the landscape that serves a real aesthetic purpose, but it's sort of a small collector's thing that's fun to have, and so that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Does Remnant Roots plan to carry that anytime soon?
Propagating it, yeah, propagating it. So
Awesome.
it would probably be just a little small pot, so you could grow it in a container on your balcony, or if you wanted to try to naturalize it on a sidewalk or something, you could, or in a little gravel lot. Yeah, it could be actually probably a cool little rock garden plant, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I've
yeah,
got some I just plucked out of the parking lot at work in
yeah,
Starkville and put in a pot, and they're doing all right. Slugs got
yeah.
them and ate them down
There
to
you
the
go. Habitat
first
for
leaves.
wildlife.
Yeah, building
Yeah,
habitat for slugs,
yeah.
imperiled
So
slug species.
not
Um,
as fun as bees, but they count.
yeah,
Something they got to eat something.
yeah. But I've actually had a dream for probably around 5 years now, which is to propagate a bunch of Obi-Wan Kenobi and go to Disney World and and either with or without permission, I might get banned from Disney World for saying this, and spread a bunch of seeds in the Star Wars section.
There will be wanted posters. Nate Bernarski is spreading Obi-Wan Kenobi. There's a disturbance in the Force. He's here. He's here.
Yeah,
Get him out of here.
yeah, that's a fun esoteric plant. Yeah, and so many people listening probably either are interested in buying native plants, growing their own native plants, or maybe even starting a nursery of their own. And I'd love to just hear whatever insights you have, because I imagine one insight, at least one that I've shared, is that the esoteric plants that are really cool to a botanist are not going to sell all that well.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and so you see this with, if anyone's familiar with Plant Delights Nursery, which is a nursery I think based out of North Carolina, and they have a botanical garden that they kind of are associated with. It's really interesting to see. They have a really fun catalog of plants. They have some really rare and obscure things, and they work with botanists who, bring them plants, and some species are described from this nursery and this juniper level botanical garden. But they try to make everything that they bring in and cultivate available to the public at some point for their gardens. And the guy who owns the nursery writes these very fun descriptions of the plants. They're very informative. They're really useful descriptions, really illustrative. But he also will tell you, this is something that we expected would sell really well, would be very popular, and it was not. And they cater to a very diverse clientele. They sell succulents, they sell natives, they sell a variety of plants. But yeah, they have some things that you would not think are esoteric. You would think they are plants that anybody would welcome in their landscape, and they just don't sell well. But they have a lot of things that are kind of like in that esoteric category. They're just unique, not very showy or descriptive. They're just unique, rare, kind of little collector's plants. And it's interesting because they cater to a lot of collectors. And so, I mean, they will tell you there's just some things that don't sell. And yeah, I mean, there's just, we know there's native plants that are very popular. People are rabid for them. Azaleas, purple coneflower. Um, there are things that are very good standard introductory native plants that somebody getting into cultivating native plants, they're immediately going to try to seek out. And they're usually plants that perform well in a variety of conditions. They're easy to grow. They're very showy. They attract pollinators. There's a lot of Instagram photos and social media posts about them. They're recognizable. But if you try, and I'm trying to think of a good example of like a locally native besides Obi-Wan Kenobia. If you tried to sell seaside goldenrod, it's a great plant. It's up here this far away from the Pontchartrain and from the coast. Whereas I say far away, I know some people watching this may be near to the coast. But if you're a bit further inland, it's a break away from Solidago altissima, tall goldenrod, Canada goldenrod. It's not so aggressive with its rhizomes, that may seed around a bunch, but it's a very attractive plant. But just the fact that it's a goldenrod, would deter some people, and they may be hesitant to plant it. Same thing you could say with roughleaf goldenrod. There's one I'm propagating right now that I'm very excited about called Solidago zedia, which used to be Solidago caesia, wreath goldenrod or blue stem goldenrod. And it's a little short woodland species. You see it growing on creek banks. And just the fact that it's a goldenrod, would take a little bit of educating the consumer, the client, whatever, to say, this is very different from, our image of goldenrod. You probably have the allergy thing that you have to explain as well. So yeah, I mean, there's plants that you may be excited to grow. And I'm going to be careful and say you should grow what excites you, but you should not start off growing, 300 seaside goldenrod and expect to go sell them. If you sold 300, if you planted 300 purple coneflower, you would clear those out. People are going to buy those. 300 native azaleas, people are going to buy those. But 300 seaside goldenrod, blue stem goldenrod, start slow with things like that. If you have a good social media presence, which I'm working on, everything about my operation is still growing, but I want to have eventually pictures where I can, or videos where I can show people these things in the landscape. I can show, it's more than just talking about the merits of this plant. I can show the merits of this plant. So I mean, there's, don't crank out 300 of something that you kind of, if you are second guessing, will people buy this? You probably should start with a smaller quantity and test the waters before you get into something like that.
72 plug tray of GM candidates.
Yeah. No, that's and I mean, some of those things, something like GM canadense may be a little different because for much of the year it is sort of nondescript. Now, if you stop and take the time to look at it, it's like moths. Everybody will stop and look at a butterfly, but nobody will ever stop and notice the intricate beauty and the tapestry of lines and spots and specks that are on a moth's wings. Because at a glance, it's just a brown, dull moth. Until you stop and look more closely at it. GM canadense is like a moth. It's really beautiful if you stop and look closely at it. That's where I think some of your terminology, like accent plants, you can have a garden, you have your showy things, but you also need some of those accent plants that sort of, calm the scene, that sort of kind of help blend some of these, really big personalities. It's kind of the cooler head in the crowd. And GM canadense is one of those. So yeah, for something like that is more of a foliage plant, the flowers are almost a secondary to the form and the foliage. I would say using your words, and a landscaper will get and appreciate this probably. Like a landscaper will understand and appreciate this better than a home gardener who's buying plants for their own yard. Um, very common, but Eupatorium capillifolium,
It's,
dog fennel, amazing plant. Poor soil, full sun, amazing architectural plant, amazing textural plant. Goes really well with the brighter goldenrods and rudbeckias and echinaceas, and is just kind of that cool patch of green. A landscaper, somebody who works with native plants, would get really excited about that. Somebody who is planting for their own garden and they live around a bunch of cow pastures where it's just in the cow pastures, probably not going to grow that. So anyway, that's a good example, I think. Yeah.
also an example of both it's an interesting phenomena and also an opportunity for the native plant nursery industry. The phenomena is that we tend to be attracted to things that are exotic.
Yes.
When you go to Britain, they've got Virginia creeper all over their walls
They got
that they plant.
black cherry. They've got goldenrod. They've got. I mean, they have a selection of dog fennel called elegant feather.
Yeah.
Pokeweed.
Yeah, the
I
pokeweed.
mean,
Um,
that's
when you
right.
walk into Oxford Botanical Garden or Botanic Garden, the first thing you see is an espaliered redbud. Um,
Yep.
it's just they really take what we have and see it in an entirely different light, and then it becomes invasive there. Um,
Yes.
and kind of one of the counterintuitive, if you will, like it's not a benefit, but maybe you could say it is a negative feedback loop to this whole destruction of habitat thing. Is the more habitat we destroy, the more exotic native plants become,
Yeah.
and the more
Yeah.
desirable they are to have in gardens.
There's also another interesting thing where, as intact native systems become harder to find, when you point out to people, the wildflowers on the roadside. Well, your average roadside is this really tangled, messy mix of Johnson grass, Japanese honeysuckle, Queen Anne's lace, Brazilian vervain. And yeah, I mean, they can be attractive in the right setting and context and individually. But on a roadside, there is if you look at a roadside, a native, roadside, country roadside that's little blue stem, narrow leaf sunflower, some of it's very different from a roadside dominated by exotic plants. Even at maturity and just laissez faire, just leave it alone, don't know it. It's going to look much more uniform. The composition is much more even. These plants they're kind of naturally spaced. That's attractive. It looks planted, but your average roadside, when you say the wildflowers on the roadside, your average roadside to go off of is the Johnson grass and the honeysuckle, and it looks tangled and messy and just really bad, gangly. It's hard to yeah, I mean it's hard to pitch people on these native assemblages of plants because still to a lot of people just anything growing wild is native, so any roadside might as well, or any suburban woodlot, the edge of it with the Japanese wisteria and the privet hedge might as well be. And that wood edge is a very different thing from an edge dominated by Carolina hornbeam or hop hornbeam and Mexican plum, and coral honeysuckle. It's two. I mean, yeah, you got plants that fulfill. You got the shrub layer and the vine, and you got the canopy, and you got the spring bloomers, but two totally different aesthetics. It's not like you can replace one with the other and they have the same look. One is tidier. The native happens to look tidier in this context in our landscape, and the mix of exotic species tends to be very, you know, unruly. And so it's that you also have that working against you, I find.
Yeah. Example I like to point to illustrate this difference between how tidy and uniform and beautiful and native landscape can be compared to an exotic one. And maybe you have an opinion on, or some background knowledge on this, but there's this prairie planting next to the Ridgeland Natchez Trace Visitor Center that has a bunch of Liatris Pycnostachya laciophila, which and it's also it shows up on some older Natchez Trace surveys as a prairie. Um, so I think it may be a natural prairie, or it may have been
Yeah.
offshored with Louisiana material or something. And you compare that with the zinnia fields that are just down the road. And the
Yes.
zinnia fields look ugly most of the year, and when they're blooming, they look good up close for a while, but they're just so
Yeah.
full of foxtail grass and Brazilian verbena versus the native one. It looks the same every year, beautiful with tons
Yes.
of liatris and silphium.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's because the field with the liatris and the silphium has also got the grasses and has also got the you know, don't look at the individual species, don't look at the trees, look at the forest, look at the system. Um, when you go to buy a wildflower mix from Walmart or from wherever, any big box store, it's going to be devoid of grasses and graminoids. It's going to be mostly annual wildflowers, maybe a few short-lived perennial, biennial things. And that's not the way, these are all grassland forbs, maybe not native grassland forbs. They may be native to some meadows in Britain, but they are grassland forbs. If you just do a planting of our native silphiums, our native liatris, our native coreopsis, and you don't have also the tapestry, of soft brush strokes that are the grasses and the sedges, then a native forb dominated planting will also begin to look pretty gnarly after a while as well. And so that's why I tell people don't skip out on native grasses and graminoids, the rushes, the sedges, things like that. In nature, they serve a function. They are keeping out competition. They are providing the fuel for fire. They are doing, some functional good. To our aesthetic, though, they are also again creating that kind of base layer on the palette, and then you have the wildflowers are really the accents. I mean, a native prairie, if you look at it, is at least probably 85 to 90% grasses and graminoids. And I think that, for the sake of aesthetics, you kind of have to have that in a landscape as well. Um, yes, I mean, you kind of got to have the composition as well. It's not just and when you have just the zinnias and the cosmos, and they're annuals, they're short-lived plants. Naturally, they would die out after a while. They would begin to fade after a while because by late summer, early fall, I mean they're an old, they're an old plant. They may still be blooming and they'll be good for another month or two, but they're getting kind of on up there in years, as it were, and their scale of maturity. So yeah, having that mix of annuals and biennials, along with the long-lived perennial forbs and the grasses and the graminoids, you got to have that blend of things, and they really all complement each other, and they're all maturing at different rates. As one thing is beginning to fade, another thing is coming into its prime, into its peak. So you're seeing the succession of plants, and you can plant in a smart way and plan to account for that. So that's what we call successional planting. Yeah.
So that is very. Oftentimes, you'll spend a ton of time and money, especially if you try tackling a big area like half an acre or something, and
Yep.
you set out these seed mixes or you plant forbs, and it's just going to get overrun by grasses. So you might as well plant grasses that you
Yeah.
like.
That's right. That's right. And so, yeah, I kind of have this policy of pick your weeds. Pick your weeds. I mean, nature is going to fill that gap. Every flower bed or landscaped border that you see, I mean, used to cottage gardens were the thing, and that was maybe a lot of exotic plants, but it was in a way almost replicating nature. I mean, there was a thing there that was sort of natural. Um, maybe refined in a sense, and then you're using some exotics mixed with natives, so it's sort of a novel ecosystem, but it is functioning in a natural sort of way. As one thing fades, one thing's coming into another thing's coming into its prime, and the other one kind of goes beneath the waves of all the verdant green new growth and flowers. But we all know it. You have beds of mulch where you have some little round evergreen thing that's 3 meters away from the next other little round green thing. And so you got a gap, which nature is not about. It's going to fill that out with some sort of early successional thing, exotic or native. So pick your weeds. I did a post on the Facebook group recently about green mulch. We call that, or matrix planting is another thing. I didn't intend for it, but I let Virginia buttonweed come in and grow in among Carex rosea. And yeah, it works really well. So, I mean, I could have planted Brown's savory there and it could have done the same thing. I could have planted frog fruit. I could have planted something, but a native weed happened to come in and fulfill the same role. For all intents and purposes, it's performing the exact same way as either of those two other plants. But, so I could have picked my weed. In that case, I happened to let a weed pick itself, and it worked out, favorably. But yeah, so pick your weeds. So pick, native grasses to be your weeds, pick native sedges to be your weeds. And if you do that, then, you won't have problems with, or maybe significantly fewer problems with the chamber bitters and the other exotic things that'll come in later. Yeah.
Absolutely prefer to have a bed that is full of Francospora colorata than full of chamber bitter.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And the cool thing is, if you plant your weeds, your weeds, your native, and I say weeds, of course, just because, plant some little short lived, early successional native species. Obi-Wan Kenobia, plant, I mean, it's not really native, I guess, but Coreopsis tinctoria, I mean, it's a regional native. But plant these things, and they're going to spread also to if you have a vacant lot down the street. You're sort of doing a conservation thing there because those things are probably going to find their way over there at some point, and you're sort of benefiting the local, ecology by your native things spreading into these other lots. And I mean, they may not outcompete the exotic weeds in that vacant lot, but they'll be present, and there'll be some pollinators that benefit from their presence, and that lot will be all the better for your weeds having spread into that lot, your early successional things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for those who think this is like a novel idea, this is literally the concept behind lawns. To put a
Yeah.
weed in the place that other weeds would grow that you like. And then
That's right.
in the case of lawns, you spend a ton of time and money making sure that that's the only inedible, useless, water-intensive weed that grows in your
That's
yard.
right. I mean, look at Bermuda grass. I mean, it's if you don't want it, it's terrible. Bermuda grass is most definitely makes a beautiful lawn. I mean, objectively speaking, and you can look at a golf course and say, that sure looks pretty. But yeah, if you ever get Bermuda grass where you don't want it, it is most definitely a weed. And I remember stories of my great great grandparents. I did not know my great great grandparents. I knew my great grandparents, several of them, but I remember some of those stories. Like lawns in the South used to be a swept bare dirt, bare soil. There wasn't a turf. I mean, it was just a, and that was sort of a tradition that came over. Because of some unfortunate historical things, that was sort of a tradition in the South that came over from Africa. And it was like a fire preventative. It was like a way to prevent fire from getting to your hut. And in the South, it was just sort of a thing that was the familiar aesthetic was brought to the New World, and your upper echelon would have turf, but there was usually livestock on it as well. I mean, it was a multi-use. There was livestock right up to the front porch, enjoying that turf. So it really wasn't so much an aesthetic thing as far as it was just added grazing, and so yeah, it just became the aesthetic norm. But yeah, running rhizomatous grasses are an early successional thing. They are the weed that we choose to fill that gap. If it wasn't that, it'd be bare soil, or it wouldn't be bare soil because something would fill it. So nature is inclined to fill in that blank slate, and we just choose turf grass to perform that role. Yeah.
If someone was wanting to replace, maybe gradually, or maybe they have the budget to do this, but replace their lawn with something that's native and functions similar to what Bermuda grass functions. So it's
Yep.
relatively low growing, can be mowed, and it can handle some foot traffic. What would be some suggestions for that?
That's hard because I mean, I'm envious of when you go to Florida or when you go to South Louisiana. You can definitely grow a lawn of frog fruit, Phyllonotiflora. You can grow sunshine mimosa, um, and they're native and they're evergreen. But we are a little bit further north latitudinally. Maybe on the coast, you could have a mild winter and those things won't brown out. And I mean, turf grass, it gets brown, but it at least is there. It's a little bit different with frog fruit and, sunshine mimosa because a winter lawn, you've got the dormant grass blades with the phyla, with the frog fruit, or with the sunshine mimosa. Those things are going to just drop their leaves and it's going to be weird and awkward looking unless you get clover and stuff to kind of come in and be the greenery for the winter. Um, if you live on the coast, I mean, St. Augustine is it's a pan tropical Mediterranean native grass. It's one of those, like a lot of coastal things. It exists on almost every continent within a latitudinal belt around the globe because its seeds were dispersed by ocean currents and stuff like that. And so St. Augustine is a native plant to the dune ecosystems on the coast. So if you live on the coast or even a little bit further inland, St. Augustine, I do consider it to be native depending on the variety that you grow. There are different varieties. Some probably originate from the old world, but we have new world varieties that are native. And skippers definitely lay their eggs on it. It's green, it's a ground cover, it's functional. So St. Augustine, I won't totally dismiss all turf grasses. But if you live further inland or if you're in a very dry area, St. Augustine likes sandier soil and it likes a lot of moisture. So don't try to force it where it doesn't want to grow. Uh, a lot of our native ground covering plants work well on a smaller scale, so like Pityopsis graminifolia, if you've ever seen a mown patch of it, actually looks pretty good as like a weird, I mean, it looks like a turf, but it's different. I mean, it's just different from the aesthetic we're used to. A lot of our native ground covers work well at a smaller scale, which I think speaks also to the fact that every one of us need to reduce our lawn size. I've got kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So having lawn is definitely beneficial because they need a spot to play. But do I need as much lawn as I currently have? No, I definitely don't. If you need a path to go somewhere, or if you need a play space, or if your kid is on the softball team and you have weekend practice at your house, by all accounts, have a turf lawn because it can hold up to the foot traffic and everything else. But if you have an area that you sort of saunter about, and ponder life, and you're just enjoying the garden, you can do with small, ground covers that look really great as a turf, but at a smaller scale. Just know that, we probably don't have a lot of natives that really completely are analogous to turf grasses in that way. Moss is great. If you've got a shady, drier yard, moss is wonderful. Um, my parents, we've got 4 live oaks up in front of my parents' house, the house that I grew up in. And my mom loves live oaks. But as they get older, they rob some moisture and whatnot from the ground, and the grass and the light, and so the grass begins to fade out. And maybe not on all soils it'll do that, but on our kind of loamier clays, it kills the grass over time. Well, moss is the weed that filled the niche. So I began to encourage it. I took a rake and I would rake it out to kind of fragment it and rake out those fragments. Then I would walk over the fragments and then, maybe put a sprinkler on for an hour and water them in. And it just really began to cover very efficiently and very quickly, a lot faster than you would expect. So a moss lawn is great. At a smaller scale, Pityopsis, Phyla, Sunshine Mimosa, and there's other things. But sometimes maybe if you have a more wooded garden and you need just a path, mulch, is good. And have, or a flagstone, and then plant between your flagstone, plant little ground covers to go in, plant some Texas sedge, Carex texensis between those flagstones. Dichondra, pony's foot, common lawn weed. but it can spread and it can get a lot of coverage. Dichondra is probably the best option for somebody who wants like a living green vascular plant turf. I would say dichondra is really, really good. Yeah.
And do you consider carpet grasses to be native?
No, no,
I can't remember the
no.
scientific name for the genus.
But yeah, I mean, it's like the turf grass, carpet grass, right? I don't. They may be a coastal native. I don't know. They, if I had to guess, they're an old world thing, but they may be native somewhere to the New World. Yeah,
Yeah.
to the U.S.
I think Weekly's puts them as, at least one of the species Weekly puts as maybe exotic in Mississippi.
Yeah, yeah,
So that
yeah.
would be, it could be
Probably
native, could be exotic.
based on my current understanding, St. Augustine is probably about the best you could do as far as the orthodox, lawn grass. That that's probably your best bet for a native lawn grass.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah.
A few others that
But
I've encountered.
well, I mean, and to revisit too. Sorry to interrupt, but sedges. I mean, I actually didn't talk enough about sedges. Somebody on Facebook recently posted about their sedge lawn. Yeah, sedges are great. If you've ever looked at Cherokee sedge and its mode, Cherokee sedge, I mean, it actually can make a very nice turf, even under mode conditions. I consider it to be our most versatile native plant, probably sun or shade, wet or dry, specimen plant grouping, or as a mode turf. In fact, it's growing at the old golf course near to on LaFleurs Bluff State Park. And there's whole very, very large swaths of it that are mowed, just like the rest of the turf grasses and the golf course. And if you were just the average person, you'd probably walk right over it and never mow. So yeah, sedges are really good. Sedges are really good. They may be a little bit coarser than you would expect. May not look as uniform. May have, because they're all clumpers. They're not going to have quite the tight or loose clumpers, but they're all clumpers. So I mean, they're going to have maybe a bit more of a uneven, not uniform, but So yeah, don't skimp on the sedges for a lawn option as well.
Yeah, I think that Carrick's meaty could be used if you mowed it high, because it
Yeah,
does seem to be, it's one of those loose clumpers. Like if you see it in the wild, at least, like it doesn't look like Cherokee sedge. If you see it in the wild, it grows in like a donut shape. Like as it gets
that's
older,
right.
there's a bare patch in the middle,
Yep.
and you can counter that by having multiple growing next to each other, and they'll kind of like pass each other, and it makes a cool effect. But with Carrick's meaty, it just forms kind of an amorphous patch.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think combining sedges would be useful in that
Yes.
in a natural, you know, sedge meadow or a natural prairie. You'll see big blue stem, gamma grass. They'll all form that stool like you're talking about, where they have the growth ring on the exterior, and they'll be bare on the inside. And in nature, quail and turkey, they love to nest inside of that hollow spot in the middle. But you will also get other plants that will begin to colonize inside of there. So having a variety of sedges to kind of pick up where the others lag at certain points may also kind of help to do that as well. And I mean, sedges cohabitate really well in nature. You see them doing that. One may dominate, but you'll usually have two or three others, and it looks very nice. Yeah.
Definitely check out Sedges, y'all. We're coming up on the end of our time, and Zoom is about to just kick us off. So we'll go ahead and just sign off. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Brady, for hopping on and talking
Thank you for
native
having me.
plants and nurseries. And I'll have to have you back on to talk about some of the other hats that you wear, and maybe talk about this again too.
Yeah, would love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.